terraced stone houses in Colne, a few miles north of Burnley, is notorious. In the alley at the back, someone scrawled drug-dealing scum on the wall. And one of the houses has a boarded-up window. It was smashed a few weeks ago after a post appeared on social media alleging schoolgirls had fallen ill after a man living here had sold them vapes spiked with drugs, including, they believed, ketamine.
So, welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. Minutes of the last meeting.
At a recent policing and community safety meeting in Colne Town Hall, parents demanded action. Karen, whose son has come through a long addiction to ketamine, was one of the first to speak.
It's becoming very apparent that there's an alarming rise in the use and distribution of illegal substances in our area, particularly on one street. I'm talking about vape fluid for kids, weed, all the way to ket. The community took the law into their own hands. Because the police are perceived to not be doing anything, I think we're going to see more of this, because people will take the law into their own hands.
Lancashire Police says it's looking into the allegations and has seized some vapes from a house in Colne and sent them off for testing. Karen says she's speaking for the many parents who've contacted her after her son spoke out about ketamine dependence.
What's even more troubling is that there are young people in our community who now face irreversible, sorry, I'm getting emotional because one is very close to my heart, life-changing damage to their bodies despite their parents begging for help early on in their addiction.
The police say dealers may use ketamine as a way to get children hooked, so they can get them onto other, more expensive drugs like cocaine. But we also know they're giving kids free ketamine, so they have to do something for them in return.
They're masters of coercion. They're masters of getting into these children's minds and playing them against the parents.
I'm sitting in Sarah's newly decorated living room. In pride of place, there's a picture of the day she renewed her wedding vows, with her daughter Lucy, aged 11, beaming in a white dress, her hair falling in waves to her shoulders. Lucy's in bed with the flu today. We've changed her and her mum's names because they're scared of retaliation if people identify them.
She was a flower girl. She was so cute and so sweet, and she was bubbly and happy and life and soul, really.
Just a year after that photo was taken, Sarah's daughter came home with white powder round her nose.
She denied it at first, but then when I showed her in the mirror, look at what you're doing to yourself, look, you know, you can't deny that, and you need help because you can't go down this path.
Did you see her high?
Yeah, it was shocking, some of the states that she's come back in, hallucinating, seeing and speaking to people that weren't there, waking up during the night, screaming.
Boys from a local college were giving Lucy the ketamine. Once she was addicted, they got her to do their dirty work. They had no qualms about the fact she was only 12. It was an advantage.
Coercing her into moving these drugs about for payment of getting her own drugs, distribution, that sort of stuff. And first I thought, I need to get revenge and get hold of these people. And then I thought, do you know what, no, I've got to play them at their game. I've got to get it into her head and her mate's head that we love them regardless. So every time she came in, I cleaned her up, I give her a hug, I put her to bed, and the next morning it was forgotten about and we started again.
But the next night Lucy would go missing. Once she came back with a black eye, another time she fell under a car. In despair, Sarah turned to the police. She'd been told about something called a police protection order, which allows an officer to take a child to a place of safety if they're at risk of harm. That then forces social services to step in. Sarah hoped they'd get her daughter some proper help. In September, she took a drastic step. When police picked Lucy up after she'd gone missing, she refused to let her back in and told police she couldn't keep her daughter safe. Lucy was put under police protection and social services put her in foster care, but only for 3 days. When they brought her home, Lucy was still putting herself in danger. So a few weeks later, Sarah asked for a police protection order again.
At the time, I thought, well, the police are going to be on board with this because, it's a mum fighting for a child. Who's going to be against that? Unfortunately for me, it didn't go that way.
When officers brought Lucy home in the early hours, Sarah refused to open the door. She told them she wanted her daughter put under a protection order. It was a standoff. In the end, Sarah opened the door.
I was arrested for child neglect, and things did get out of control. I was quite roughly handled, and all this happened while Lucy was sat in a police car and she watched while me and Dad were dragged away in handcuffs.
The arrest was captured on the video doorbell. I've watched it. Sarah opens the door. You see her being pulled out of the house, onto the ground, and held down. Her husband was also arrested. They were taken to the police station, where they were held for 13 hours. Lucy stayed with her brother at home.
I was just desperate to get the help for Lucy as quickly as I could, because it was a dire situation, and I didn't want her to be face down in a canal somewhere, or found in a bush, or all the other horrible things that go through your head when she goes missing. Nobody wants to admit that they failed and can't control their own children. So it's very hard to ask for help, and you shouldn't be criminalised or victimised or judged for doing that.
Lancashire police told us they went to the house to return a child who'd been reported missing, and they arrested Sarah and her husband over concerns for the welfare of a child. They said Sarah's husband was also arrested on suspicion of assaulting an emergency worker after an officer received an injury to his foot. But Sarah and her husband were released without charge. Out of the trauma of that night did come some action. The police gave Lucy a support worker from the exploitation team for a while. Sarah's sure her daughter's stopped taking ketamine, but she's refused offers of counselling, so social services are ending their support. They can't force her to accept help. It's 5 months since Sarah was arrested. It's had a lasting impact. How are you?
I'm alright. I do okay. I still haven't been out my house since that happened with the police. I fear everything that goes on out there, and I'll go to the front door and have a panic attack.
Well, that's a pretty devastating effect on you.
It's been traumatic, to say the least.
Father Alex from St Matthew's Church says the mums who come to his support group are in as dark a place as their children.
We're not an affluent church by any means. In fact, we're pretty skint. And recognising that there was no support, recognising that there was mums in crisis, there are mums on the brink of suicide, we felt we needed to do something, so we worked with a professional counsellor, and it costs us about £140 a week. We barely get that on the plate on a Sunday.
What does it say that it's fallen to you, to St Matthew's Church, to pick up the baton on this?
You know, that's what your members of parliament's for, that's what your county councillors are for, that's what your police inspectors are for. I do what I can, but, I've got limitations, and this needs professional intervention.
Lancashire County Council says it is helping a growing number of families affected by ketamine addiction. The charity With You, which it partly funds, has a base in Burnley where families can get help, and there's a web chat service for anyone who wants to ask for advice anonymously. Dr Sakti Karunanathy is Lancashire's Director of Public Health.
We are putting as much support as we possibly can muster, and working with the schools, working with families, working with the communities. We tend to have a more family-centred approach, so it will extend from supporting the individual with the medical treatment and psychological treatment and the wider support, as well as dealing with issues that may be present in the family.
We've met several families who say, look, ketamine use amongst young people is rife, and they're absolutely in despair at what to do for their children. One mum that I met, Sarah, she refused to let her daughter back in the house, her ketamine addicted daughter, because she felt it was the only way for services to realise the gravity of the situation.
Yes, there is more we can do in supporting families like mums like Sarah. We are trying everything we possibly can at a local level to continue to support families where the resources allow us to do as a local authority, but also working with other partners to support leaders like Father Frost as well as other community leaders.
But in a sense, though, it's not Father Frost's job, and I think he's starting to feel rather overwhelmed by it.
I do hear that, and we are working with him to see what more and what different things we need to do.
Lancashire County Council says everyone from outreach teams to youth services to the police is working together to prevent children taking ketamine or to help them stop. It stresses very few users are younger than 14, although it has referred 3 children to inpatient detox and rehab centres in the past year. But there's nowhere locally. They have to send them outside Lancashire. And in the meantime, children are turning up at adult rehab asking for help.
10 beds in this building. 10 beds in the first stage.
Elisha House is a residential recovery community for men. Carl Molyneux is the manager.
That's the most vulnerable time. You know, them first few days, the first few weeks when they come to us.
This is an adult service, but children, 16, 17-year-old boys, are knocking on Carl's door.
I had a 17-year-old in my office the other week who was looking for some support. He said that when he started using ketamine, he was still in school.
And how hard was it for you when you've got that 17-year-old lad in your office to have to say, look, we can't take you?
Yeah, it's heartbreaking. Young people, they might use ketamine for a couple of years and then they've got this lifelong health problem off the back of it, which seemed quite cruel. You know, there's going to be a lot of young people walking around with colostomy bags on, you know, with bladders that don't work anymore.
Ryan, who we met earlier on having hospital treatment, stopped ketamine just in time. He's escaped organ failure, but not the painful, lifelong consequences. And he knows other young people who are barely living.
I mean, I know people who've been in hospital with it because your stomach's spasming from the cramps. Your stomach ends up rupturing and tearing. Some people have prolapse from this. You could not be a ketamine addict for 30 years, 20 years, 10 years. You couldn't. It's not possible. You die.
What is the answer to the growing ketamine crisis? Ryan and some of the parents I've met want the drug reclassified as Class A, which would mean anyone supplying it could get a life sentence. But it would also mean children caught in possession could face up to 7 years in jail rather than 5. Some drugs charities say putting ketamine in the same bracket as heroin and cocaine might stop children asking for help because they'll be scared of being prosecuted. Inspector Matt Plummer from Lancashire Police says generally children caught with ketamine are dealt with informally, offered words of advice and support.
It's not a case that we can just arrest our way out of the ketamine issue.
Do you think upping the classification, making it a Class A drug, would make any difference?
What it will give us is increased sentencing, and that's where it would be important. So the people that are supplying the drugs, it would give the courts the increased sentencing power then to deal with them.
The government told us it's deeply concerned about the recent rise in ketamine use, and work is going on across policing and health to drive down the supply and use of drugs. It said it will carefully consider the experts' recommendations before deciding whether to make ketamine Class A. Inspector Plummer doesn't know whether changing the classification will put children off.
But in terms of the children taking it, whether that's going to actually change their behaviour, I'm unsure.
We don't know what impact it would have if ketamine were made a Class A drug, nor do we know the long-term effects on children who start taking it at 12, 13, 14. But Father Alex Frost says we can't wait to find out, that he raised the alarm because kids need help now.
Burnley's a brilliant place. It's not different to other towns. If it's going on in Burnley, then it's going on in Blackburn, and it's going on in Preston, and it's going on in Blackpool. This is going on across the country. I think it's an epidemic, and it's time to speak, and it's time for people to listen.
win in the scramble for the Arctic.
Speaking to people who are helping nature to flourish.
It is ambitious. I love it, and it's a wonderful idea.
The new series of Rare Earth.
On Friday.